Hello, this is J Lyle, and today I'm going to be reviewing the book The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. I recently listened to this book on audiobook, and it was really interesting. It is a book that I had been wanting to listen to for a very long time because I'm such a big fan of the Peter Jackson movies. And so I decided to read this book, and I want to give you my review of it because it is such a legendary part of Western fiction. And I think it's something that anybody who's interested in fantasy at all should review or listen to or read, because it seems to me to be one of the classics of fantasy as we know it. So I'm going to start a little bit about the book and the author. So this book was written in 1954 by J.R. Tolkien. It is a very famous and very old book. I think the fact that this book has been a part of the zeitgeist for so long is really fantastic. It is over 75 years, and something really interesting about this book, besides the fact that this is a fantasy genre and there are so many fantasy books, that this one kind of, broke the mold and created something so iconic and legendary within the genre. I think that what's so interesting about this book is that J.R. Tolkien actually wrote this book and the other three books of the trilogy at the same time, and it was actually his editor and publisher that asked him to break the book into three separate books. So The Lord of the Rings, the first part became The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, which I've read, and I also plan to read the other two in the future. So I think this is a really interesting book and a great part of history, and I was enamored with the Peter Jackson movies, mostly for the characterization and the epicness of that story. And so here we are. The first thing I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the primary concepts or the plot of the book. So essentially, this book is about a journey, and it is a journey of the very small and meek doing something extraordinary and great. And I think that is a very important part of this story. I know that The Lord of the Rings was written by Tolkien to be a fantastical reflection of perhaps English history. And I suppose I don't know quite enough about English history to make any one-to-one connections, but I also think that it was written in such a way that there is no way to kind of do that one-to-one. It's more metaphorical, and the good and evil of it all is more based in its themes, and the characters and plots and people and armies and different things that you find in the book are more based upon a general metaphor rather than a one-to-one. So it's not the type of work that you can compare that way to history, from my experience anyway, as far as I've researched this book. But that is still pretty amazing that he wrote that as a reflection of how England came to be, or perhaps how the West came to be. And I really like that. But it's also a journey of the meek, so it kind of has that narrative of even kind of Judeo-Christian lore, and how the Savior came in the form of someone very meek, and that was his path to live a life of someone so meek in order to do something so great. And so there's a lot of metaphor there as well. And they have the good and evil metaphor as well in the story, where they're talking about the armies and how Middle Earth is defeating the evil characters in Mordor, and the orcs and Sauron, and Saruman and all of these other characters. And it's really pretty interesting. And at the end of the book, I think most people would know that the good always prevails. But what I think is so interesting about this book is that it goes a little bit deeper than just having the good prevail. It's a very deep book. And I think the metaphor they have around what's evil and is a little bit more nuanced because it has a structure that is around war. And I think that's really important because it isn't really a mystical evil that takes over the world, even though the ring of power is a magical ring. It's really a tool for war, essentially. And that's essentially how the West came to be through a number of wars. And I think that's really interesting that he uses that ring as a tool because that's essentially what everyone wants of it. Once they get the ring, they're going to use it for war. They're going to use it to fortify themselves. They're going to use it to take over this or defeat the evil if they claim to be good. But I think one of the larger metaphors in the book is that, and I guess this is true of all of the books, and I'm kind of talking more broadly about all the books right now, but I'll say that the power of the ring is corrupting. So even if you're good and you have good intentions for it, if you do war, it will corrupt you. War is corrupting, war is evil. And so they kind of have that narrative throughout, and they kind of juxtapose that to the good, which is found in these very meek and small people who seek only simple things. And I think that's very powerful in the book as well. And they hold this dynamic up for you to see in the Fellowship of the Ring, specifically in the formation of the group. Half the group essentially are hobbits, which are these really small, folksy people who just want to sing and smoke, their pipe weed and whatever else they do, and sing songs and eat and drink and be merry. And they have these humans and elves and wizards and powerful beings that want to establish kingdoms and defeat armies and reign and rule and stuff like that. And so they have that juxtapositions within the very fellowship, and I think that's really interesting as well. So beyond those primary plot elements and metaphorical elements, I would like to talk about some challenges that I have the book. The reality is, and this is an endorsement of the book, I didn't have a whole lot of challenges when I was reading it. It was really interesting. I was actually afraid when I first started reading the book, or I listened to it on audiobook. When I first started listening to it, I was a little bit afraid that there would be some kind of like narrative, or like the text would be a little bit too dense for me to enjoy it because of the impression that I got from the movies, that it was probably really dense and it's very like written in kind of a very high English or very old English type of way. And it's not. It's actually not that difficult to read. It's kind of a light read. It does get into a lot of lore and it kind of meanders, which is actually my main challenge with the book. Sometimes it does meander because there is a lot of lore. So everything in the book, and this is an endorsement of the writer really, that there seems to be a lot of lore in pretty much everything that you can possibly think of. If they're going through the woods and they meet a tree and the tree does something, there's lore behind it. If they pick up a sword on the side of the road and the sword is unique, there's lore behind it. And they kind of build that into like every step you take and every path that these characters cross, there's some kind of lore that they're interacting with. And I think that is really interesting about this book. And this is why it can go so deep, and why the Lord of the Rings and what we know about it is something that people study for their whole lives. Like people study the languages of the book that were actually created. They study the history of the book, The Hobbit, which was a children's book. They study the notes and texts that Tolkien wrote that his son collected into a book, and about these characters and about these stories and about all the lore of the different pieces of the book. So that part of it's amazing, but it does meander a little bit to where you kind of lose track of what is actually happening, and you might tune out a little bit in certain places because you're reading and or listening in my case, and you're like in the middle of a song between two characters and they're just singing for a good amount of time, and you're learning about the song that these hobbit people are singing, and you're not sure what this has to do with anything, but it brings a lot of character to the story, and it brings a good understanding of who these people are essentially, and what different aspects of the story means to these characters. So it's good, but it does meander. It does, for me at least, I lost track of it a little bit, but on the whole, there's not a whole lot of challenges that I had with this book. It was quite enjoyable for the most part. Now, let's talk about what I really liked about this book. So, what I really liked about The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, is that, again, it has a really, really deep lore. And everyone and everything has a deep lore. So, I really appreciated how the hobbits were portrayed. I really thought it was just like these perhaps folksy people that didn't really have very much about them at all to speak of, and that I assumed it was written in such a way that we start with the Hobbit and the Shire. We start with them, but we quickly move away from that because that's not the real story. The real story is the ring and getting it to Mount Doom. And I assumed that we wouldn't know too much about these people, but they really, really focus on who these people are, what their thought process is, how they react to different things. It's all very intentional. So these Hobbit people, they like to sing. Throughout the book, they're singing. They're singing no matter where they go. They're missing the Shire. They're missing the way that they used to spend time with their kin and their loved ones, or the different things they did in town, rather than taking a ring in this treacherous mission to save Middle Earth. So it's something that they're always nostalgic for throughout this book. And I think that's really powerful because you're always building character development for hobbits in general, not just even those individual hobbits and those individual characters of Frodo, Sam, Pippin, and Merry. Additionally, they have lore for like everything you see. Like there's lakes and rivers, and there's trees and forests, and the forests turn dark, and the forests actually don't like you being in there, so they get you lost and they make sure that you never come out of there alive. And these are a lot of really interesting things in the book. I also really like the fact that the book has way more scenes or episodes that the characters go through as they make their way to establishing the fellowship, to then taking the ring to where Galadriel is, and then going from there to where they separate. I really loved these little episodes, and I wish those episodes were in the movie. I understand that they took them out for a good reason, and they should have took most of them out, of course. But it was so awesome learning about these little episodes, about them going to the Barrow Wights, and there's this new kind of evil there that is unique and was not discussed in the movie. And there's the forest that is dark and evil, and there's a tree in there that none understand and can be very dangerous and can try to kill you potentially. That's very interesting. There's just so many little episodes, and I really enjoyed that about the book. So, yes, I liked the episodes, but the episodes also showed me why I had an issue with the movies. So, I really like the movies, but what's really interesting about the books versus the movies to me is that even when I watched the movie for the first time, the very first movie, The Fellowship of the Ring, I got a sense that I was a little underwhelmed by Gandalf because of how he was portrayed in the movies. I love Ian McKellen. I really like his character. I really like everything that they had going on in there, but I thought that he wasn't very powerful as a wizard. So he's supposed to be this wizard. He's supposed to be very powerful and do all these amazing things, but we only see him really do anything interesting one time, and that was the time when he got taken out of the movie, when he had to fight the Balrog and he got thrown underground into that deep chasm. And what I learned in the books is that there was a lot of different scenes where he was using magic and he did some pretty spectacular things. And I said to myself, this is the kind of stuff I wish was in the movie, because I actually missed it a lot. And I think they allowed him to do more things in the broader context of the movie, so in the second trilogy. But I think that I wish I had seen more of those little episodes of him doing miraculous things in the actual movie, The Fellowship of the Rings, which in retrospect, I think they really should have taken the time to focus on some of the very, very specific episodes in the series instead of what they did with the Lord of the Rings series that they made on Amazon Prime. I think that series got a really bad reviews and it was not very well received. I think what they should have done was spend time focusing on what was actually in the plot instead of trying to modernize it, instead of trying to tell stories that were not actually a part of the lore. And I think that would have been more successful. In fact, if they were to try now or sometime in the near future to redo the trilogy, the first trilogy, I would totally be here for that as a series, like as a extended series, like they did with the Amazon Prime Lord of the Rings show. Because there's just so many episodes that they can get into and so many characters that they haven't talked about. They can talk about Tom Bombadil. They could talk about the forest. They could talk about the wolves that were chasing them at some point. They could talk about just so many different episodes that they didn't really focus on in the movie, in the first movie. And I think that would be really cool. I think people would really enjoy that. And there's so much space for it instead of, creating things that really hardcore fans are going to find difficult to enjoy. So what I liked about the book did make me see the flaws in the movie. So they definitely nerfed Gandalf in the movies. He was not as, I wouldn't say he's weaker, but he was not as interesting for sure, because he had more powers and more feats that he displayed in the books versus the movies. Also, I noticed that the movies are streamlined. I think that was a good thing. They needed to be streamlined so that they could be a digestible story. And I think they did that very successfully. And I'll also say that everyone feels more real in the book. The book just paints a picture of who these characters are a lot better. And you get to love them for who they are and understand them as people and see what they like and don't like in ways that you don't really get from watching the movies. And I think that is a trait of all books that have movie adaptations, but I really liked it. And the other thing that I really like about the book is that it was just very dreamy. I think that it contrasts a lot of the modern fantasy that we see today, and that every moment inside of the book is not seeking some kind of epic payoff. A lot of the moments in the book feel as if they're in service of world building, of character building, of setting a tone that helps you appreciate who these characters are and really what the journey is about itself. And I really appreciate that. It reminds me, if I were to describe what some of the book feels like, even as they're just finishing a battle and they're going to a place of rest, and they're going to another place in a second that's going to be even more treacherous. They still have moments where these characters are thinking about home and they're feeling nostalgic and they're enjoying a meal and they're looking at their surroundings and saying, I like this or I don't like that. And this is what's going to help me get through. And I'm going to think about this now. And I think that's all very special about this book. That feels very refreshing in comparison to a lot of modern fantasy, that some of which I've read and some of which I've just observed in perhaps film or listened to. And if I were to describe what it's like, it reminds me of sometimes when you might have to do an errand or go on a trip that's a couple hours away from where you live, and you have to go there for some reason, and there's no way not to go there because that's the only place that this one thing that you have to do can take place. And you're like, oh yeah, I gotta go 2 hours south to this place, and then I have to come back. And that's my journey. And it reminds me of the things that you think about when you do those things. Like, I have to travel 2 hours south. So either you're on a train or you're walking or you're in your car and you're just looking at the surroundings, at places you've never been, on roads you've never driven on, seeing people you've never seen who live very differently than you, even less than an hour from where you live. And you start to think about, what is this place? Why am I doing this? What is this journey? What am I going to miss while I'm gone? And a lot of times, I've noticed anyway in my life, when I have to do trips like that, I really feel good about having made that trip to do the thing that I had to do and then come back home. And so that's kind of what this book reminds me of. There's a lot of moments like that where the characters are feeling nostalgic or thinking about better things or processing things that are happening in the context of what they know or what their values are. And I think that that's all very meaningful and powerful. And so I really love The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. It was a really great book. And I really look forward to in the future reading and or listening to the other 2 volumes of this book series, because it is very enjoyable. Again, it's a classic series, and I think anybody who's interested in fantasy should take a look at it as a classic literature, as a part of the fantasy canon. I think you should definitely check it out. Or if you're just interested in the genre in particular, or just generally, I would check it out. It's really enjoyable. And I think even people who aren't interested in fantasy could enjoy it, because I think that the pictures that it paints is more of a people. It seems like when you're actually reading it, you're going through some type of it seems like you're going through some type of anthropological journey through the lives of a particular people at a particular time. It's very anthropological in that way, and I think that's why it's so interesting in some ways as well. So that is my review of The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. I think it's a very enjoyable book. Check it out, and I hope you check out my next video soon. Thank you for listening, and have a good one.